And just want to say hello to Dan and Renee, James and John, who let me stay at their place there for a couple days. Thank you, guys. It was a lot of fun. But it's nice to be back, right? Wouldn't you say? Anyways, we are on Numbers 33, and this is an account of the kind of a journal type thing that Moses kept of all their different stops from the beginning to the very end. And I found this article online that talks about each stop, what it means, the meaning, and it was pretty interesting. It's pretty long, but there's a lot of good stuff in it. And but before we start, let's say a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we just thank you that we could be back here in Mesa, Arizona. We just thank you for this time that we could look into your word and we can learn from you. We thank you so much, and we just pray for a great evening tonight in Yeshua's name. Amen. So what I'll do, I just want to read the intro first, and then I'll read the account in Numbers 33. I actually found this. I was looking for something because we could just read through it, and it's pretty quick. But I found this. There was a website. It was called At the Foot of the Covenant Ministries. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. I'd never heard of them, but kind of like the wordplay, foot of the covenant, instead of foot of the cross. So they were, from what I read, definitely Torah observant. So let me just read the intro to begin with. The wilderness journey, as recorded in Numbers 33, carries for us not only an accurate historical breakdown of the route that was taken by Israel in their journey from Mitzrayim to the border of the Promised Land, but also a great deal in helping us understand how we today are too on a wilderness journey, as we are in the world, but not of the world. And so each of these 42 places where Yisrael stopped carries great insight for us in helping us to become the prepared bride who is ready to receive the fullness of all the promises that are in Messiah when he comes again to fetch us and take us to be with him in the land that we have been promised. These 42 stops are great life lessons for us from which we can glean. And there's Bud. Hello, Bud. These 42 stops are great life lessons for us from which we can glean much understanding from in terms of the choices that we face on a daily basis are critical to walking, that doesn't quite make sense, but are critical to walking out a set-apart life. The purpose of putting this document together is simply to bring some further insight and clarity in understanding our sojourning here. And this is by no means a complete and full understanding of each stop, but rather a tool for each one to equip them in furthering their desire to truly walk set apart. And so it is with this thought in mind that I encourage you all to dig deeper and seek the application of this wonderful Torah portion, making it alive and applicable to each of you personally. Before starting with each stop individually, it is important for us to realize that our walk will be fruitless without the Torah and leading of the Ruach HaKodesh. And as we walk fully in and stay in Messiah, our high priest, and the living Torah, may we bear much fruit that lasts, realizing that every action, thought, and deed can and must only be done in and through him who has called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. And verse 1 speaks of this. They went under the hand of Moshe and Aharon. So that's a little intro. So I'm just going to read, unless somebody wants to read, 1 through 49. Oh, you want to read? Okay, I will read then. Numbers 33. These are the departures of the children of Israel who went out of the land of Mitzrayim by their divisions under the hand of Moshe and Aaron. And Moshe wrote down the starting points of their departures at the mouth of Yahuwah, and these are their departures according to their starting points. So they departed from Ramses in the first new moon on the 15th day of the first new moon on the morrow of the Pesach. The children of Israel went out with boldness before the eyes of all the Mitzrites. And the Mitzrites who were burying all their firstborn, whom Yahuwah had stricken among them, also on their mighty ones Yahuwah had executed judgments. Then the children of Israel departed from Ramses and camped at Sukkot. And they departed from Sukkot and camped at Etham, which is on the edge of the wilderness. And they departed from Etham and turned back to Pi-Hahirot, which is east of Baal Zephon, and they camped near Migdol. And they departed from before Hahirot and passed over through the midst of the sea into the wilderness, went 3 days' journey into the wilderness of Etham, and camped at Marah. And they departed from Marah and came to Elim, and at Elim were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. So they camped there. And they departed from Elim and camped by the Sea of Reeds. And they departed from the Sea of Reeds and camped in the wilderness of Sin. And they departed from the wilderness of Sin and camped at Dophkah. And they departed from Dophkah and camped at Alush. And they departed from Alush and camped at Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. And they departed from Rephidim and camped in the wilderness of Sinai. And they departed from the wilderness of Sinai and camped at Kibrot Hatta'awah. And they departed from Kibrot Hatta'awah and camped at Hatzerot. And they departed from Hatzerot and camped at Rithmah. And they departed from Rithmah and camped at Rimmon Peretz. And they departed from Rimmon Peretz and camped at Libnah. And they departed from Libnah and camped at Risa. And they departed from Risa and camped at Kehalatha. And they departed from Kehalatha and camped at Mount Shapher. And they departed from Mount Shapher and camped at Haradah. And they departed from Haradah and camped at Makhelot. And they departed from Makhelot and camped at Tahath. And they departed from Tahath and camped at Terah. And they departed from Terah and camped at Mithkah. And they departed from Mithkah and camped at Hashmonah. And they departed from Hashmonah and camped at Moserot. And they departed from Moserot and camped at Bnei Ha'akan. And they departed from Bnei Ha'akan and camped at Hor Hagigad. And they departed from Hor Hagigad and camped at Yotbathah. And they departed from Hotbathah and camped at Abronah. And they departed from Abronah and camped at Etzion Geber. And they departed from Etzion Geber and camped in the wilderness of Zin, which is Kadesh. And they departed from Kadesh and camped at Mount Hor on the boundary of the land of Edom. Then Aharon the priest went up to Mount Hor at the mouth of Yahuwah and died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Mitzrayim on the first day of the 5th new moon. Now Aharon was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor, and the sovereign of Arad, the Canaanite, who dwelt in the south in the land of Canaan, heard of the coming of the children of Israel. So they departed from Mount Hor and camped at Zalmonah. And they departed from Zalmonah and camped at Punon. And they departed from Punon and camped at Oboth. And they departed from Oboth and camped at Aye HaAbarim on the border of Moab. And they departed from Ayim and camped at Dibon Gad. And they departed from Dibon Gad and camped at Almon Dibla Yema. And they departed from Almon Dibla Yema and camped in the mountains of Abarim before Nebo. And they departed from the mountains of Abarim and camped in the desert plains of Moab by the Yarden of Jericho. And they camped by the Yarden from Beth Yeshimot as far as Abel Shittim in the desert plains of Moab. So that's a long journey, right? 40 years worth, 42 stops. So, thank you. I think the first 8, we'll see the first 8 are from up to Mount Zion, or Sinai, I'm sorry. And then the last from Mount Or to the end. So there's probably about, in that 38-year period between maybe 2 years, camping 2 years at a place and then moving on. Anyways, starting at the beginning, we'll start back at Ramses, because that's where it starts, right? Ramses, and the meaning is child of the sun. A city in Lower Mitzrayim built by Hebrew slaves, probably in Goshen. Remember that Goshen was the part of the land that was given to the Israelites where they could tend their sheep and were protected from the plagues sent upon Mitzrayim. Israel had invested much time and effort into building this city where they dwell and had to leave. They had to leave behind that which they had built. And this is an important lesson for us, as we too have to leave behind the places of pagan worship that we perhaps have invested much or even all of our time, energy, and resources as we realize how we were in fact in bondage and enslaved to the lies of man-made traditions and worship practices that are twisted forms of sun worship. We have to leave the child of the sun, that is, we have to leave all forms of Tammuz worship and all that is related to pagan sun worship. Because that's really what it is, right? I mean, we're living in Egypt, it's all sun worship. Where was it? Okay. Mitzrayim literally means worshipers of Ra, or sun god. Ra was their sun god. In the Hebrew, the words used for Egypt are Mitzrayim, page 4714, that's the strong numbers if you want to look these up, which are Matsur, and Zur. These words all mean one form or another of besieged, bondage, constricted, encampment, shut in, enclosed. So it's interesting that the actual name of Egypt literally means bondage. That's what they called it. Just as Yahuwah delivered Israel back then from bondage, so too does our mighty Maker release us from bondage to enslavement of man's twisted traditions and worship practices. By his blood, the blood of Yehoshua, Messiah, he has come to set the captives free and release the prisoners release from darkness the prisoners. They left on the 15th day of the first month of Yahuwah's calendar on the day after Pesach and went out with boldness. Yahuwah defies the whole idea of sun worship around equinox and solstice worship as done by pagan worship and calendar setting by bringing his people out at the full moon. This was not an undercover mission. They went out boldly. And so we must not be sorry to leave behind the lies. Leaving Ramses is vital to us if we are to become a prepared bride, a move that sadly too many are not willing to make, and so their journey of walking in righteousness never gets off the ground. We also must begin to recognize and understand Yahuwah's reckoning of time, as we have been enslaved by man's pagan adapted calendars which center on the worship of the sun and all forms of pagan deities. One of the things we are to strip away is the lies of calendars that have no correlation to Yahuwah's time schedule or his appointed times, which for us is critical, especially as we sojourn here in the wilderness, so to speak. Leaving Ramses also represents for us our leaving of pagan-centered feasts such as Christmas, Easter, and Lent, all of which are centered around worship of Nimrod, Semiramis, who is also known as Ishtar or Easter, and Tammuz. Leaving Ramses for Sukkot. In Revelation 12, we see a 42-month period beginning as the woman leaves Jerusalem, go into the wilderness after giving birth. Satan was cast out of heaven, and the child was caught up to Elohim and his throne, while the woman went into the wilderness to a place prepared and was nurtured. And a great sign was seen in heaven, a woman clad with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And being pregnant, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign was seen in heaven, and see a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns on his heads. And his tail draws a third of the stars of the heavens and throws them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she bore a male child who was to shepherd all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught away to Elohim and his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by Elohim to be nourished there 1,260 days. Our wilderness journey is a time of nourishment and preparation as we learn to hear the voice of the Almighty, and as we see in their journey through the wilderness that Yahuwah did in fact nourish them and prepared them to enter into his promised land. Yes, it took longer than one would expect, but we can learn through these stops that the longer we rebel and grumble, the longer it will take for us to enter into his rest. And quite frankly, we do not have 40 years to get our act together. I like the way this guy writes. He doesn't pull any punches. So leaving Ramses is the start. We have not yet arrived. It is only the beginning. Then the stripping away truly begins. What starts our journey is the realization of his true name. Yahuwah made himself known through Moshe, his name, and so our journey begins with the acknowledgement and acceptance of the true name of Yahuwah, as opposed to hybrid pagan titles that far too long have many falsely attributed to the Creator in vain. And acknowledgement of his name will help bring the full understanding of who it is who is calling you out. For his name and his name alone declares who in fact made you and causes you to be. And so Yisrael could boldly leave because they knew the one who was saving them. So many today are still stuck in Ramses because they refuse to accept the true name under the veil of lies that have brought his name to naught, and in fact broke the third commandment through replacing his name with all kinds of titles and falsehood that is attributed to sun worship and their false deities. That is why when most are asked what the 10 Commandments they are, they often start with Exodus 23, "You shall have no other mighty ones before my face," in which they are half right, as we should have no other mighty ones before him. But the first commandment clearly starts in verse 2 with who he is. "I am Yahuwah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery." To begin our exile slavery to the world's man-made system of profane worship, we need to acknowledge and accept the name that saves and calls upon that name. For all who call upon the name of Yahuwah shall be delivered. Most will remain in their Ramses simply because they do not know his name. And Proverbs 34 says, "Who has gone up to heaven and come down?" I think we read this on Shabbat, didn't we? "Who has gathered the wind in his fist? Who has bound the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is his son's name, if you know it?" As the majority of Christians today, what the name of their God is, and they simply will not be able to tell you, as they will waver between various titles that are associated with pagan deities, or even use the pagan twisted name of Zeus worship that was conveniently translated by pagan influenced scribes or translators. It is time to come out of her, my people, declares Yahuwah of hosts. Jeremiah 8:8. How do you say we are wise and the Torah of Yahuwah is with us? But look, the false pen of the scribe has worked falsehood. Sad reality today is the majority has believed the deception and is in essence stuck in their Ramses. It begins with his name, and those who by faith call upon his name receive the free gift of deliverance by the blood of Messiah. Israel has been delivered from bondage by the blood of the Lamb and the doorposts of their home, and now it was time to leave behind all they had known and step out in faith and follow the one who had delivered them from the hand of Pharaoh. Any thoughts or questions on all? I know it's a lot, but any questions, comments?
What was the verse?
I can hear you. Our husband's so helpful.
What was the verse about? Do you know what his name is?
That is Proverbs 30, verse 4. Yeah. So Ramses, that's the starting point. You had a question?
I missed the first part. Who wrote this?
Well, I don't know that. I couldn't find a name. The only thing I could find is a YouTube channel or a website. It's called
date on it?
At the Foot of the Covenant Ministries.
They have a date on the article?
No date.
So is he talking about Ramses as a pharaoh when
No, he's just talking about the city, not the pharaoh.
Talking about the city. So Akhenaten is the pharaoh that instituted sun worship. Sun worship.
Was Ramses?
Yeah, Akhenaten
Yeah.
is the pharaoh.
But didn't he live?
But all other times it was a pantheon.
Yeah. Didn't he live before the time of the Exodus, though? I think that's as I recall from that patterns
Right,
of
but
evidence.
I'm not clear. Is he saying that they had a whole pantheon of gods? They didn't just have one god.
Right. Well, he's just talking about the place Ramses and
So
what it represents.
He's just talking about the city.
Yeah, because they built Ramses, the Israelites. Yeah, that's where they departed from.
So is he mentioning, so the city, but what time period is he talking about? When it was first built, or?
Well, they left the night of Pesach.
No, I'm talking about what year?
Oh, I don't know. They don't mention a year.
Wasn't Ramses, the city Ramses, named after the pharaoh Ramses?
I believe so, yeah.
Because my point is that Hebrews left 200 years before Ramses was alive. So,
Supposedly.
well, you can choose between the atheistic scholars who made up a bunch of stories about when they left, or you can choose between somebody like, the Evidence Demands a Verdict documentary, where they presented a massive amount of evidence, solid evidence, that they left 200 years before.
Yeah.
And the timeline works, whereas the timeline looking at the time of Ramses, that doesn't work.
Well, I don't really think.
So I'm just saying, it just to make it clear, it gets confusing when you're talking about them.
So the text is telling us that they left Ramses, this city named Ramses.
Yeah, that's what it says in the.
Yeah. And so the question is, just like there was more than one Tutmosis, was there more than one Ramses?
Well, in Patterns of Evidence, what they're talking about is the fact that this is a later reference saying they left the place where Ramses was. But Ramses wasn't there when they left.
Right. Well, it doesn't say he was.
Before Ramses was there, but later in history, they said they left from where Ramses was. Yeah, that was the place, but Ramses wasn't there at the time they left.
Yeah. Well,
I know it gets confusing, but that's
not really the point. The point is that they started in Egypt. That's where we have our starting point. We were in Egypt, we were called out, and then we have to go on this journey. So his point mainly is that you can learn from each stop because of the individual things that happen to them along the way. Some good, some not so good.
Is this lady referencing, is she saying that later in time they assigned that city name to the place where they left? Since this is being written or it's being documented here in Numbers 33, if it was the writer that's documenting it, then it would have to have been within 50, at least 40 to 50 years of departure, unless she's proposing that one of the writers later that wrote a new copy of the Torah said, you know what, that's not, the place where we left. We know where that is. Now it's called Ramses. Is that what she's proposing, that it was added in later in history?
Well, I don't know if it's she. It's in the book on the patterns of evidence.
Yeah.
They have a book and the video, the documentary. But in the book, I can't remember every little detail, but they go into this in great detail in the book about why that is. But all I remember is that, the writers were just referring to that area as Ramses because that's how they knew it. That's how they knew the name of the area. It's like referring to Mount Hermon, but the earlier name was Mount Bashan. Same place. It just had different names through time.
Yeah. They're not referring to I guess there was a Pharaoh Ramses, right? I remember watching that Patterns of Evidence, but I can't remember if he said he lived before or after. I think they tried to. Yeah, they redid
according to the evidence he developed in the timeline, they left approximately 200 years before Ramses.
Yeah, and then they renamed the city. I recall a name like Pithom or something. Pithom, yeah. So probably right. They probably did rename it Ramses, but in the text here, it says they left Ramses. That's what I'm going with. So that's actually not a stop. That's just the starting point. The first stop is Sukkot. And it is kind of interesting that they go right from Egypt to Sukkot. And of course, Sukkot means, anybody knows what it means? We should all know what it means. Booths. We have a winner. Very good. So, it means booths or dwelling. We are sojourners here, and the first stop of coming out of sun worship is to enter the dwelling of the Most High Elohim. Sukkot is the festival of booths that we keep each year as we remember these wilderness journeys, and that we too are sojourners here as we await the return of Messiah when he will come and make his booth here among us, and we shall dwell with him forever. This city stop was still in the land of Mitzrayim, and reminds us clearly that although we are still in the world, we are not of the world. It was at Sukkot that Yisrael learned to camp out, as this too was a territory pretty much occupied by Bedouins and tent dwellers. It was here at Sukkot that we see from Exodus 13, 1 through 16, that the regulations for the firstborn males are given. And as I said in Revelation 12, the woman bore a male child who would shepherd all the nations with a rod of iron. Our first stop at coming out of Mitzrayim, Babylon, Christianity, is in fact beginning to keep the Sabbath and so enter his rest each week and learn his Torah as a community that is sojourning together. And I would say for probably all of us, that's probably one of the first things we did, right? We started keeping Sabbath. You came to the light, so to speak, and then most people, it was like I remember coming here for the first time and then thinking back later, it's like, I don't really know how I ended up there, but it was just like I was led there for some reason. You have a comment?
I've done this back, 10 years ago in a congregational setting. I'd done it twice. So when we had, pretty good crowd, I would ask, how many of you came to this walk through the Sabbath? And always over 50% raise their hand. So then I would ask, how many of you are firstborn? And over half every time.
Firstborn children, you mean?
Yes, firstborn children.
Oh, that's a good point.
I'm sorry, not firstborn, lastborn.
Oh, lastborn.
Yeah.
I'm 1 from 10, and I'm a secondborn, so I'm far from lastborn. You're a lastborn child, right? Of like, how many?
Lastborn, but it's these, like Jacob, you can always see the not the firstborn, but the lastborn ends up getting a lot of like Ephraim, Joseph. I mean, you go down the line of all these, there's a pattern of the lastborn. And then the other pattern, I like patterns. So I saw this pattern of the Sabbath, and a lot of people, there's a few that came in through the name, but boy, it's majority through Shabbat.
Yeah. Are you a lastborn? Oh. So in Ezekiel 20:12 it says, "And I also gave them my Sabbath to be a sign between them and me, to know that I am Yahuwah, who sets them apart." And Exodus 31, verses 13 and 14, "And you speak to the children of Israel, saying, My Sabbath you are to guard by all means, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, to know that I, Yahuwah, am setting you apart. And you shall guard the Sabbath, for it is set apart to you. Everyone who profanes it shall certainly be put to death. For anyone who does work on it, and that being shall be cut off from among his people." It is truly here at the Sukkot stop, in a sense, where we learn to rest in him and allow his word to give us his peace and strength. So we move from calling upon his name and receiving the sign of our worship by keeping his Sabbath. The enemy also has a marked sign of worship, and that is Sunday worship. And all who follow the beast and his image by worshiping on the day of the sun, while forsaking to keep the Sabbath of Yahuwah, receive the mark of the beast on their forehead as they cognitively choose to disregard the Torah and follow the beast under the teachings of traditions and man-made dogmas, as well as on their right hand, which we know the scripture that the right hand is symbolic of that of which one works. And so by working and not resting on the Sabbath of Yahuwah, then one is in fact receiving the mark of the beast. 2. This is serious business and part of our coming out of Mitzrayim. Babylon is to forsake the traditions of the world and institutionalized forms of worship, and has clearly adopted pagan practices as its basis and means of existence. Okay, so that's just the first stop. And they really weren't, I don't think they're for too long, but it's interesting how they go right from Egypt to Sukkot. The first thing they did. Interesting, I think, thing I learned about Sukkot recently, if you read in, I believe it's Leviticus 23, when it talks about the Sukkot. See if I can find it here. Okay, in verse 41. "And you shall celebrate it as a festival to Yahuwah for 7 days in the year, a law forever in your generations. Celebrate it in the 7th new moon. Dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native born in Israel dwell in booths, so that your generations know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim. I am Yahuwah, your Elohim." So it seems to be saying here that the reason we celebrate Sukkot is because of this time where they went to this place, Sukkot, and dwelt in booths for a time. Because when they left Egypt, they literally had nothing. It says they just had to pack up the bread in sacks and Yeah. But it's also interesting that they celebrated in the 7th month, even though it actually happened right after Pesach, like the very next day. So I just thought, any comments? I just thought that was kind of interesting. Pat?
So refresh my mind why we have the great 8-day celebration.
That's a good
tacked on
question.
the end.
I was just referring to the Sukkot overall. The reason it being celebrated is because of this event where they left Egypt and went to Sukkot. Commemorating an event. But unlike Pesach, where Pesach is commemorated on the day that it happened, he commemorates it in the 7th month. Also on the 15th day of the month, 6 months later. So they're almost like bookend festivals in a way.
So in light of what we were talking about on Shabbat, when redemptions, they're being redeemed out of Egypt here.
Right.
And Egypt is the enemy. The enemy is going to be destroyed. They're not going to have to face that enemy again. So when Yeshua comes back and we go through the great white throne judgment, an enemy is going to be destroyed. And just like after the enemy was destroyed here, they're going to go on the Sukkot, right, and encamp. And so this tabernacling is a memorial of that event, showing that we're going to see another enemy destroyed.
Right.
And so when this destruction of the enemy ends and we have this new life, they've got the king with them. You know, he wanted to be king. He told them to clean your camp, I'll be in your midst. So the king's going to come and tabernacle with us. So it's another example of, just like the coming out of Egypt, when the enemy is destroyed, it's time to tabernacle with the king.
Right. It's also a matter of faith, because when they came out of Egypt, they didn't bring anything with them. And so they're at this new place, except some, gold. So they're totally reliant on the master, right? I mean, they don't even have tents yet. They have to build these makeshift booths, to sleep in, at least for that night. I don't know if they did for 7 days or what. But the start of their journey, it was like, we have nothing. We just have to rely on Yahuwah for everything right now. We don't even have a tent to sleep in. So, and I don't know if we'll ever we may get to the point where, you always talk about, when you hear the whistle, like you hear the whistle, you just got to go, leave it all behind. And, you're just like totally reliant, on your Yahuwah. And maybe it will be like that. I don't know.
I'd rather hear the whistle than see the death angel come.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, I wonder, and I didn't ever think about it until just now, because they have all the gold and silver of Egypt in their possession, it makes you wonder if the nations had known they were coming out with that wealth, they might have been attacking them to try to take the wealth from them.
Okay, well, stop number 2 is called Etham, and it means with them, their plowshare. In understanding the meaning of with them, we can see how in Revelation 12 that Satan is cast out of heaven down to earth, where a man dwells, and so now he is with them and is here, and he has set up his government control through the beast. Etham deals with sin that is here with us, and how Yahuwah is also here with us by his Spirit. We must deal with sin in our lives and not accept the rule of sin, lawlessness, but walk in the instruction of Yahuwah. This is a place of reality check. We must choose wisely whom we serve. We know that Satan is here, and he is constantly on the prowl like a lion. always looking for someone to devour. It is at this early stage of the journey where, in fact, he does devour many as insecurities begin to set in, and compromise can be the cause of many as they tend to follow the crowd, preferring to be with them rather than living set apart and have the prospect of being persecuted. What Ethan can also picture for us in understanding with them their plowshare, we can see great joy in knowing that during the kingdom, Messiah will dwell with us, and we will beat our swords into plowshares. Listen to what Micah the prophet says, Micah 4:1-5. And in the latter days it shall be that the mountain of the house of Yahuwah is established on the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills. And people shall flow to it, and many nations shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of Yahuwah, to the house of the Elohim of Jacob, and let him teach us his ways, and let us walk in his paths. For out of Zion comes forth the Torah and the word of Yahuwah from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among many peoples, and reprove strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall now lift up sword against nation, neither teach battle any more. But each one shall sit under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one to make them afraid, for the mouth of Yahuwah of hosts has spoken. For all the people walk, each one in the name of his mighty one, but we walk in the name of Yahuwah our Elohim forever and ever. Amen. With their plowshare, we can also speak to us of unity of Israel, which is renewed at the Feast of Sukkot, and how we then plow the ground for the next year's growth. And it's always, I think that was my 5th Sukkot. Did anybody else kind of experience what do they call that, post-Sukkot sadness, kind of like a little letdown? Okay, tell me.
There was a huge letdown.
Oh.
So much so that when we were just reading this 33, I was thinking maybe we could do Sukkot twice.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how, we just came off of Sukkot and we're already thinking about next year, I mean, it really kind of fires you up, just to get, to celebrate all the feasts, and just go through the cycle of feast. Maybe that's why he gives us the half-year break, so we can just re-prep our hearts and our minds to. So, okay. So we're only at stop number 3, going to a place called Pi Hahirot, or something like that, where the sedge grows. The P or pay means mouth, and Hahirot means wrath. Revelation 12:14-15, and the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle to fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And out of the mouth the serpent spewed water like a river after the woman, to cause her to be swept away by the river. Also, if you did know, when it says times and half a time, that is also year, 2 years and half a year, 3.5 years, which is 42 months, prophetically speaking, and 1,260 days is also 42 months. So they're all kind of similar terms, 3 different ways to say pretty much the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. The serpent unleashes wrath out of his mouth against the woman in the wilderness, and here we have the parallel of Pharaoh unleashing his wrath against Israel by pursuing them when they were encamped here. Israel was helped here as they crossed through the Sea of Reeds on dry land, and Pharaoh and his army was killed in the sea. What a wonderful parallel we see in Revelation of the woman being helped. Revelation 12:16, and the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Revelation 13:1, we see the beast coming out of the sea from the dead. It was here after Pi-hahiroth, and having crossed through the sea of reeds, that Moshe proclaimed praise for Yahuwah after Pharaoh and his whole army had died and was swallowed up by the sea. Exodus 15:11, who is like you, O Yahuwah, among the mighty ones? Who is like you, great in set apartness, awesome in praises, working wonders? A contrasting parallel we see in Revelation 13:4, in what the people of the world marvel at by the appearance of a beast out of the sea. And they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to fight with him? What we see here is the blasphemies being spewed out of the mouth of the masses in worship of the beast. Our breath we have been given is to give praise unto Yahuwah our Elohim and none other. Psalm 156, let all that have breath praise Yah, praise Yah. Pi-hahiroth was east of Baal Zephon, which means Lord of the North or Lord of the Hidden or secret place. It is here that we realize that amidst the blasphemies and threats of the enemy, we find refuge in Yahuwah. He is our hiding place. I won't try and sing the song. We know that the dragon will fight those guarding the commands of Elohim and possessing the witness of Yahushua Messiah, and this calls for faithful endurance on the part of the set-apart ones. Migdol was near here and means tower. We know that the name of Yahuwah is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and are safe. May this remind us that no matter how much persecution we may come under, we have a name that has given us safety and refuge. This stop also helps us to realize that no matter how much persecution we come under as we stay in Messiah, we are safe. Now, another vital lesson we can take from this is that we are to watch our own mouths. Yes, sir. Oh.
I was going to say, in light of what Ward talked about at Sukkot with the dragons and the water and all that stuff. So it makes me now wonder, did the Almighty, knowing that they were worshiping the deities that were ultimately serving the one in the water, he takes them out and kills them in the water that the enemy lives in. Isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah.
I never really looked at it like that.
That's almost like another plague, huh? James 3:10 says, out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brothers, this should not be so. What we can learn from the parallels between what happened here and what is recorded in Revelation is that while the true worshipers worship the Father in spirit and truth, the masses will worship the beast, for both sides use the same word. Who is like? May our mouths declare only praise for Yahuwah, our Elohim. That is interesting that they even say that about the beast. Who is like the beast? But in reality is, who is like our Elohim? So I think we have one more. Actually, this is the point where they do cross the sea from what's the name of that thing again? Pi-hahiroth. That's where they were when they crossed. And once again, referring to that patterns of evidence, I liked how he kind of, has anybody seen it? I know you've seen it. Pat's seen it. You guys haven't seen it? The patterns of evidence movies. They're very interesting because he kind of describes how they went into this like canyon thing where they were, and then there was a big broad area where they could camp right at the sea. And so the Egyptians had to come through this narrow pass to get to them. So they couldn't just like spread out. So it's interesting that they were penned in, and really they had no options except to right. Yeah. So I would recommend that video. It's very there. I think there's like 3 of them or so. Okay, so we got time for one more. Mara, which is the word for bitter, and we've talked about this before. After the victory at the Sea of Reeds, they went on a 3-day journey and came to Mara, where they complained as they had no water, as the water of Mara was bitter, and so the people grumbled and rebelled against Moshe. Exodus 15:23 through 26. And they came to Mara, and they were unable to drink the waters of Mara, for they were bitter. So the name of it was called Mara. And the people grumbled against Moshe, saying, "What are we to drink?" Then he cried out to Yahuwah, and Yahuwah showed him a tree. So when he threw it into the waters were made sweet. There he made a law and right ruling for them, and there he tried them. And he said, "If you diligently obey the voice of Yahuwah your Elohim, and do what is right in his eyes, and shall listen to his commands, and shall guard all his law, I shall bring on you none of the diseases I brought on the Mitzrites, for I am Yahuwah who heals you." Mara is a lesson for us in rebellion against the word of Elohim and trust in his provision. Mara still exists today. There is a village there. The water is still bitter. But guess what? The bitter water is not harmful. In fact, it has health benefits in that it kills parasites and bad bacteria in the digestive system, while not harming the good bacteria. Could it be that Yahuwah wanted to cleanse their bodies internally from the effects of Mitzrayim? How sad it is when we think we know best and get bitter when things do not go the way we expect it to. We must learn from this that Yahuwah always knows what is best, and he always seeks out that which is good for us, even when we may not understand it. Let us realize the effect of bitterness that will cause us to say wrong things. Yahuwah hates those who sow discord among the brothers, and rebellion sours the freshness of the living waters. We are told in Psalm 95 not to harden our hearts as they did here at Mara. The spirit of rebellion is opposite of the spirit of unity. It is in the spirit of rebellion that the end times beast will rear its ugly head. Revelation 13:5-6, we see how the beast blasphemed against Elohim, his name and his tent that leads the world astray. Take the mark of rebellion of worshiping the beast and his image. And he was given a mouth speaking great matters and blasphemies, and he was given authority to do so 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against Elohim, to blaspheme his name and his tent and those dwelling in the heaven. When one gets bitter, the natural reaction that follows is slander and rebellion and blasphemies. And we are to guard our mouths, not allowing any form of bitterness to come and bear rotten fruit. Isaiah 50:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, to put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. And James 4:14, but if you have bitter jealousy and self-seeking in your heart, do not boast against and lie against the truth. Amen. So we got time for another one, it looks like. Fifth stop, Elim, which means palms. It can also mean righteous men or strength, as in rams. This is where there were 12 fountains and 70 palm trees, 12 representing the 12 tribes, and 70 representing the number of the nations on the earth at that time. They had just been bitter, instructed to diligently, boy, I have trouble with that word, diligently obey the voice of Yahuwah, and in doing so, after having water from the rock, he leads them to this oasis or place of refreshing in order to strengthen them. I like to think of this as arriving at Palm Springs, if you will. We can learn from this in that even though we too have found ourselves perhaps at times just as bitter as they were in the wilderness, when we come to the rock of our salvation and drink from the living water, he will lead us beside still waters and strengthen our souls. Even while we are in the wilderness, Elim can also mean their leader. Revelation 13:7-9 shows how the world will follow their evil leader, while we, the people of faith, Israel, follow Yahushua, the King of Israel. And it was given to him to fight with the set-apart ones and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe and tongue and nation. And all those dwelling on the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life of the slain Lamb from the foundation of the world shall worship him. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. It is Yisrael, 12 fountains, that is to reach the 70 rest of the nations with living water. That is, it is the living waters of Yahuwah that brings healing to the nations. Any comments? So the next one is short, so we do have time. They get shorter. I know those first two were pretty long. And there's 42 of them. Sea of Reeds. Yam, that's the word for sea. Suf is the word for reeds. Yam Suf is the Sea of Reeds, also known as the Sea of the End. This stop is symbolic of how we must come to the end of ourself and put to death our flesh. We must take up our execution stake and follow Yahushua. Prophetically, those who overcome do so by the blood of the Lamb, word of their testimony, and not loving their life until death. That's in Revelation 12:11. We also know that the passing through the Sea of Reeds is symbolic of baptism, or rather immersion, and that when we are immersed in Messiah, we are in fact making a public confession and declaration that we have died to self and been raised new in Messiah, and we have therefore put an end to that which we were, and take up our new life in Messiah and walk boldly in him. So that was a short one. Next one's pretty short, so I'll read that one too. Top number 7, wilderness of sin. Wilderness. Anybody know the word for wilderness? Midbar. Very good. Wilderness of sin. But I believe sin means thorn or clay. So that's kind of similar to. Right. Right. This is kind of a wilderness like out here. If you go out in the desert, you're in the wilderness. Midbar, sin. This is where Yahuwah provided manna for Israel. We know too that in the last days we will also see supernatural provision. And we also know that Messiah is the bread of life that came down from heaven. Psalm 37:25. I have been young, and now I am old. Yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, or his seed begging bread. Those are some pretty powerful words, really. Now listen, we do not just sit down and think that everything will fall into our laps. We are to be about being faithful to his word. Work diligently with our all unto him. As we obey Torah and prepare for the days ahead, Yahuwah will provide the blessing and the miracles. As clay is also representative of man and wilderness, can also mean mouth, we can have here the picture of the mouth of man, or even better still, the clay foundations of the doctrines of man that are not safe and sound, but vulnerable and break easy under pressure. We must trust in Elohim for our provision and watch our mouths, as This was the place where they grumbled again about not having food, and actually, some wanted to go back to Mitzrayim and thought that it was better off being a slave and getting a plate of food and having to rely on provision in the wilderness. This is the futility of man and his words. Our words can be a thorn for us, or rather the words of man that we may be inclined to follow can become a thorn for us and cause us to grumble and complain when we are to trust in and rely upon Elohim for all and praise his name. Amen. And it's now 7 o'clock, so we made it through 7 stops. Only 35? Is that 35 to go? So we can pick up next week if that's what you would like to do. You guys find this interesting? Okay. Well, I thank everyone for joining us. Hope you learned something. And let's close in a word of prayer. Father, we just thank you. We just thank you mostly that you did call us out of Egypt. And Father, your Spirit is the thing that led us to respond to you. We know that. We know that we are just sinful people who like to grumble and complain. And Father, we can learn from our brothers who were in the wilderness long before us, those who have gone before us. Father, just teach us and guide us and help us to always be thankful for the things that you do for us, even when we don't want to. We just, Father, need to realize that you are always there for us, and we can totally rely on you, even when the days ahead grow darker and darker. We thank you. We pray these things in the name of Yehoshua, our Messiah. Amen. Amen. And thank you, guys.